Okay, welcome everyone. I'll just reiterate the agenda really quickly one last time. And the first is to talk about the vocational training that's being done and how the ELL system is playing a role in that, and the grant that we're learning it got from the State Refugees Office. And then also we'll talk about scheduling and how to communicate that and share our schedules. So without further ado, I don't know, Tim or Azra, if you want to launch into what you folks are working on.
I'll start, and then Tim, if you want to hop on, feel free to let me know. Hi everyone, it's good to see you all. So yes, as Alex was saying, so the great news is we got an additional grant.
Azra, can you put the mic in front of your? There we go.
Grant funding. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
From Tracy's office in regarding particularly retention, which is wonderful. So we're working closely with BDCC to kind of revamp some of the curriculum specifically around CDL licensing, childcare, and perhaps either construction or healthcare. We'll see which kind of component it's going to be. We're taking it in the CDL first as a more piloting to create something around a ELL kind of focused boot camps, and to hopefully be able to create some kind of system for this, so that we'd be able to, bring in students that have a rotating schedule throughout the year, matched up, and of course working then with CCV and other local partners. There's certainly some interest in this, so thanks for Alex and his team for getting all of that information. And then our focus would be the ELL development, but their actual certification, the actual class would come from either CCV and other partners. Did you want to add anything to that, Tim, or we're good? Okay.
No, just to say that this is, I think, part, it will be, we're kind of providing complementary, this is kind of plugging, I think, a hole that has existed in terms of educational pathways for many of these clients, where we know that there are vocational opportunities available for them. For the examples Azra cited are numerous, specifically commercial driver's license trainings, licensed nursing assistants trainings, but there's just this bit of a language gap that needs to be filled, in order for the eligible students or participants to have the required, not just basic English language skills, but specific more technical vocabulary that they need to build that are going to be relevant to those particular career or vocational pathways. So what we're trying to develop here with these boot camps is really kind of filling that gap that exists or the perceived gap that we see in the system between regular sort of English language learning opportunities, but providing short-term targeted intense English language learning opportunities to be able to connect these folks and get them eligible for these vocational training opportunities. So that's just looking at this sort of from a systemic level. That's kind of what we're looking to plug with this particular opportunity.
So thank you, Tim. Exactly. It'll be the pre-training to this, so the development of pre-training, and we're not recreating the material that already exists, but it is recreating it to meet the ELL population. So as we've known after working with them for the last couple months and almost a year now, you've picked up on where some of our weak links and maybe where that gap has been, and so it's working with the existing material, but for an ELL population, and that pre-training to their formal training. So still working on the piloting, but I'm very excited for it. So any questions or anything about that?
Yeah, so what I wanted to share is our role both as the BDCC, but through working communities and through this convening, is really to look at the system as it exists or as we hope it exists. And so if we're talking about the day when someone first arrives up until they have gotten their second promotion at work, all of our partners here are involved along that process. And so I think it's really part of this work is charting out what's an ideal pathway. And so, for instance, right now, Vermont Adult Learning has done great one-on-one and some tutoring of individuals doing these, pursuing these career pathways. And so as a system, our goal is to scale that. So if we have 4 or 5 people interested in health careers, how do we do that locally in region? And so that is part of it. And so I absolutely envision, our partners at VAL playing a role in these pipelines. And so I think it's really just, what we're seeing now is that transitioning of curricula, and in some ways teaching to that initial test of, for instance, you can't start your CDL training until you pass the permit test. You can't start your LNA course until you pass that entrance exam. And so there are these milestones or barriers or gates that, I think there's a lot of pre-work that is what this pathway is looking at. And then there's going to be a role for co-teachers, because CCV are the training providers for childcare. And CCV does not do ELL, right? So part of solving this problem is, who's going to work on the curricula, but also who's going to actually be in the classroom. And then also who's going to be available to tutor students who may be falling behind or need extra supplemental work. And so these are all things that I don't think any one of our organizations could do all of. And so I think that's really, as we look at specific pathways, this is very general, and CDL is going to be the first one we build, and then early childhood education, and drastically different pathways. One is for CDL driver, you work with Todd in Bellows Falls. That's it. That's the only way to do it in Windham County. And he's the guy. It's all up here and on the DMV website, where the childcare is a huge network of folks at CCV and a local childcare counts coalition and building bright futures. And so how each of these pathways will look different, but I think identifying our roles and responsibilities as the players is kind of what this the goal is. And to what do we learn and rinse and repeat. Sean Marie.
I just wanted to share, I'm sorry, I have a bit of laryngitis. I just wanted to share with you that we have an IET, which is an integrated educational program, and it is specifically through the adult ed in Bennington. I don't know what the other centers have for the IETs, which is connected with the state. And we are doing one in early childhood, which I'm happy to talk more about, where we, so we have this funny catch-22 in the early childhood world, in that you can take some of these courses in the ladder from Northern Lights or CCV, but you can't actually get a certificate to work in the program unless you have a high school diploma, unless you've had CPR training. So our program works basically to prep a person for that, which for us would also include the ELL. So, it's basically an 8-week program that we try and get a couple students in at a time. And we do a work placement for them where they also get paid by the Department of Labor. We happen to have one ELL Afghan that is actually working in early childhood right now, but she really wants to do banking. So she's not going to be one of our test cases because we're going to try and lower her hours at early childhood and put her in a work placement in a bank. But just as a model, it's something we will do. And we can do it as many times as we have students. So different adult ed centers have different IETs. Some have them in, weatherization, some have them in the CDL. I mean, we work with, some of them require high school diplomas, some of them do not. And I know some of our new Americans are coming in with a lot of degrees, but not necessarily the language. So it's food for thought. And obviously I work with ASRA to tell her what's going on this side of the state.
Yeah, I would love to, I'll follow up, you know, probably the start of the new year on your early childhood education pathway, because there's no need to reinvent the wheel there. We'd love to learn from what you folks are doing. And then again, I think that's what, that additional ELL layer is really what's unique to this. So a lot of these pathways exist and they're known entities. We know who funds them, but it's the integration of ELL services that again, Vermont makes uniquely difficult sometimes, because it's, we have our tech centers do half the trainings and
Oh,
CCV and who knows who's paying for it. And anyways, that's a great example.
I
Yep.
couldn't agree more.
Yeah. But that's my role in all of this is to navigate that, so ideally, as individual pieces of this longer term puzzle, you have less worries of, all of that. And we can kind of create a pipeline that makes sense and that we can share with, our students themselves. I mean, that's another goal of this initiative is that, I've had someone show up to a construction class who had no idea why he was showing up, which great that he's pursuing additional education, but we all know success is driven by your own goals and what you'd like to do. And so I think that's something that if we can get these pathways, that this might take you a year and a half to become an LNA, but this is the path that you take to, to get there, I think maybe reassuring to some folks and empowering to many. Other questions, specific, high level, anything around that? Great. And of course, if you're working with folks and there is a really specific, or maybe not specific, but we're seeing a bunch of folks transition to a different kind of career, that is something that we can also look at adding. We can always look at adding a different pathway or a different focus area. I know that there may be some folks moving to CNS wholesale grocers. And so shipping and logistics is an industry that has all of its own jargon also. So, as folks move and pursue different things, that tail may wag the dog a bit. And so we'll keep it open. Great. The other thing, especially as in theory, we'll be adding more classes or industry specific classes. I did want to share my first pass at so I already know I need to change it because we're going to include, it's going to be across Southern Vermont. So I'm just going to take some notes here. So this will be the ELL schedule. And what I've done is I've created a Google Calendar that will upload. And so it can keep it uploaded. So for instance, if someone is interested in looking at all the classes, here's a beginner's class for men. I'll be able to put locations in and any other notes. And then if someone wants to go, they can copy it to their own Google Calendar if they're adept at using Google. And so I'm going to add a SOVT focus and then include locations. And then so this is on our Working Communities website now. So see, there's a lot, sorry for moving fast, but now people will be able to go to welcomingcommunitiesvt.com. I can share this. If they want to learn about anything else we're up to, that's fine, but you can click down to the ELL class schedule and it'll bring you to the most updated thing. So for the time being, you can email me changes, updates, and just say, hey, we moved this class half an hour, or who knows what. And I've just set it to repeat. So it'll repeat the same every week. One thing I noticed is that, the advanced, I got 2 different times. One said 5:30 to 7:30 and one said 6 to 8. I don't know.
6 to 8.
Cool, great. But yeah, anything you see, and then also, so there, I know that there are online learning opportunities. I'll check to see, can I add registration or that information directly into this? Because that might be useful for someone who wants to join or who wants to sign up for that class. So really, you can send me anything you might want included, and I'd be happy to include it. Yeah, Tim and then Gerald.
Thanks, Alex, for putting that together. I think that's going to be really, really helpful. One thing I wonder whether or not whether it would also be possible to add is like kind of horizontally is the term dates, because at least for us, we have like these classes are organized by term. So you could see at the top, like going across whether or not like when a term ends and when a term begins. Because for example, I think, and Azra, correct me if I'm wrong, we know when our next term is going to begin, even if we don't know necessarily the exact class schedule that will exist. So at least projecting forward, you can see when, when will the next terms be, and so on and so. So I just wonder whether or not something like that would be useful in this context.
Okay,
I'm here.
You need more light, or you okay?
No,
And
I'm
so,
okay.
in terms
I know
of,
your plants are so
Okay.
happy.
Kate, can you please mute yourself?
I got it. In terms of, okay, so the term dates, do you mean like, so that it just stops repeating the calendar when it ends, or actually something on top to say like, it'd be like semester 1, like, I can probably have all the way from like now through January, and then above it could say semester 2.
Right, exactly. Or like fall, like world learning NVEP spring term, like January 15th to March 31st,
Yeah.
Because these things aren't, at least for us, at least they do stop repeating it at a certain point.
Sure. Yeah, so go ahead, Azra, you're gonna say something.
I was just gonna say, yes, Tim, to your point, Alex, it is terms of what we have primarily a spring, summer, and fall term. The classes might, for the most part, be the same, like the hours of the time, but the name just does distinguish some of the patterns in regards to registration and just how we're tracking. So that might be helpful. I can of course email you what that is. I think if it's just like we can just say winter or spring term, like in the title, that might be helpful.
Yep. Yeah, so feel free to send me that kind of information, any of you, and I will try my darndest to represent it on the Google thing. It took me like a stressful amount of time this morning. I'm not as tech savvy as I'd like to be, but I think I'll be able to do all of this and find a way to do it.
Well, I appreciate you putting that together, so thank you.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, Gerald, sorry.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that with the online learning center, anyone who wants to take any of those classes has to be registered as a VAL student.
Okay.
Correct, Robin? Correct, and Jackie? Because Robin's running online classes now. And so I'm just double checking that. And I don't know if that's something to also appropriately have as a link in your calendar, but it should state that if somebody's going to do online learning classes, they need to be registered with VAL.
So what I can do at the bottom, or somewhere near, either the bottom or the top of the calendar to say, click here to register for courses at Vermont Adult Learning, click here for, for the new Vermont Education Program, like that kind of stuff. Like registration and contact links. If it's, a student or, someone looking on behalf of a student, I can.
Right, and I think that, they would have to, yeah, contact Val and go through the registration. So maybe we can talk, Jackie and Robin, about what's the best contact link that they could open up and see the online learning center, but then they're not able to open up any of the specific links to contact the teacher. So they would have to definitely get there through us. So we'll discuss what would be the best link to connect with that. And as far as the calendar classes and semesters, Val kind of goes through waves. So, I think the one that I sent you is good between now and I believe June. So those are the online learning centers. As far as our classes go, they'll just change dependent on the student needs. So like this week, my late afternoon class with Vermont Plank Flooring is almost coming to an end because a bunch of those guys are going to, change their work shifts to CNS, and now they have to have morning classes. So that's the fluctuation. We'll just keep you updated. Or if those classes still need, because mine are up at, those are up at Val, but the ones at Bird Street in particular that are not a tutorial, those will fluctuate and we'll add as we need.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, I think that's where, while I don't love the aesthetic of it, the Google Calendar provides the most flexibility. So that's where you could send me the email and I can just change that, move thing an hour, half an hour, delete it, whatever you need really easily. And it'll immediately reflect on the website. It's something that I don't need our web designer to do. So that's why, that's why I picked this, so that we can be flexible. You just let me know what might need to be changed or communicated differently. We'll do it. Yeah, Leslie.
I'm just wondering, thinking about the calendar, if it would help at all to have anything color coded. So it's clear to students if they have to register for Val class, those classes are yellow. The ones that are at the Multicultural Center, certain color or something. I just don't know for the students if it would be easier for them to see things if they were color coded.
Yes, in short, I'm going to end up doing that. Again, that's something I tried and failed to do this morning. What'll end up happening is I'm going to set up a way, essentially there's going to be a new email address that has many Google calendars that will do just what you say. So right now this is tied to my personal Google Calendar and it's just like one ELL thing, and that's why everything's red. But I'll rework it, certainly, before the start of the new year. So we can do exactly that. We can start color coding things. And I'm almost certain there'd be a way that if you invite, ELL at brattleborodevelopment.com or whatever, to a meeting, there's a way you could probably immediately update something on the website itself. That's something that we could explore together. But yes, color coding is going to be a goal for that.
Can I ask one other just quick question? You were saying it's welcoming communities, that's the website, and this is working communities. And are those two being used interchangeably? I realize I use them interchangeably a lot, welcoming and working, and I'm just wondering, are they talking about two separate things now? Or are we using them interchangeably?
That's an excellent existential question that I think, we struggle with because, so we consider, this is, not super important for many folks, but, the stuff that the BDCC does that isn't funded through the Working Communities Challenge, we often refer to welcoming communities. And other like this convening is a Working Communities initiative. It's bad branding. And so I think, we recognize that being confusing. Yes, so I think they can be used interchangeably, but I think that is something we're going to clear up. And just to show, you can type in workingcommunitiesvt.com and it'll bring you to this website. You can do southernvermontworkingcommunities.com, and it'll bring you, I bought a ton of different URLs, and this is kind of how we're doing things. But in theory, the Working Communities Project will end eventually. And this work certainly won't when that initiative runs its course. Not a great answer, but that is like it is as convoluted as you've noticed. So yeah. I run both of the initiatives, so if you have any questions, you just at least just ask me, right? That's all things end or start or whatever you want to say, over with me. So yeah. Any other questions? I want to leave time for folks to share just how things are going, and what is there anything new and exciting planned for the coming year? What's something we may have learned that what really clicked or what really hasn't clicked yet? Would just love to create some space for that. Sure, Gerald.
Okay, so we've looked at our schedules of current classes. When do you anticipate the parallel ELL vocational work to get started, to who's going to start doing the ELL design component of a CDL program, for instance? So when, how, who does that get started? What's the timeline? What's our goal date to get this up and running? So a couple questions.
I can take a first crack. So there's two activities I would say that are happening at the same time. And one is articulating the education and training pathway. And then the subsection of that is curricula adaptation for that. And so for the CDL and early childhood education, the full mapping of the pathway, it has started, and it's in some ways driven by the BDCC. But the first and most easy thing that we're able to do is get curricula. And so right now, that's something that World Learning is doing with the CDL program. We haven't received curricula from CCV for Northern Lights yet, but we're going to be doing that after I connect with Sean Marie to see how they've gone about it. But I think, so that's where everything is in phases. And then once we understand what the curriculum looks like, then we'll need to say, what is it? What kind of personnel hours? What's the duration of the training? Who are the most likely students? And then we'll talk about staffing and scheduling. And so when I wouldn't hazard a guess for a training start date for any of these yet. There'll be many conversations between us as partners before we really, can articulate what that explicit training even looks like. Whether it's a pre-training, whether it's a co-teaching, whether it's teaching and tutoring after. Like, the model is what is still being fleshed out. So I'd say very early stages for this.
Okay, so I guess just trying to be clear, because I want to know what Val's role will be in that part of it. Should we be working on something, developing something? I guess I just want to know what the next steps are for Val's part in it. If we're learning, Azra, you have someone already working on developing CDL, ELL parallel component to it. So I guess I just want to be clear, what's Val's part in developing any of this, or what legwork should we be doing?
Yeah, and I think, Azra, go ahead.
No, good.
Yeah, so I think part of what it's really articulating the various roles and responsibilities that are required to implement the training program, that are agnostic in some ways to who's doing it. so that we can come back together as a team and understand who's best suited to provide that role. So in some instances, it will be like the curricula will be done, curricula adaptation will be done by World Learning, but and then that'll be like articulate what that training may look like or the duration of those hours, and we'll come together and say, all right, as a region, as a system of partners, you know, how do we fund all of the various components for it? How do, you know, who staffs what, who has the resources in place to do it? And where do those expertise lie, right? And so I think I don't think there are preconceived notions as to who's doing exactly what along these pathways. I don't think any of our organizations are receiving enough funding to duplicate efforts. And so I think that's really where the first is like, what are all the bits and bobbles that go into doing this? And then as a group, we'll say, oh, like who can actually do this, or who has the expertise or, and, you know, the capacity to do it right now. And so that's, you know, with the CDL, it's really just that curricula phase that World Learning's doing. We'll know quite soon once that's done, the personnel hours required to implement the training, and then what kind of tutoring support students may need when they finish the training and they've gotten their permit and they're in the class, you know, what supplemental support attached with that cohort may be needed. You know, these are all different and varying levels of ELL engagement and wraparound services that we will work on together. And so I think, again, these will be, they'll be different by industry. And so you know, the way I've envisioned it is, you know, we will coalesce around a very explicit pathway. Even because funding is different between how we'll pay for CDL versus how we pay for the childcare, you know, because the BDCC has a grant through Building Bright Futures to do the childcare stuff. So that's where it's like, we don't need to worry about Department of Labor funds or who's a what's it, you know, that kind of thing. So again, it's, we'll start convening small specific focus teams, like, you know, little teams around meeting the very specific needs that we've identified around a training pathway. But it has, you know, just begun, I'll say. You know, we just got the curricula from the CDL folks recently. So that's where we are.
Very early. Thank you, Alex.
Other questions? Anything noteworthy going particularly well, or persisting difficulties?
Yeah. Challenges or resources we feel that we're still missing.
Sean Marie.
So we're one step closer to a new space in Bennington, and it is 7,500 square feet, which is more than we need. And so in talking to one of the ECD reps on this side of the state, they're looking for space. And I spoke to the architect yesterday about putting a very large room at the sort of bottom of these big stairs, which is, I guess one could technically call it a basement, but as a place that could be either for worship or could be a place where kids could go while the classes are upstairs. And we even have, although I asked them to make them smaller, even though the space is big, a couple offices that would be able to have ECDC have one, but also to have little conference rooms that are obviously, you know, like when you go to an airport or those WeWork places, there's like little rooms that you could like meet one-on-one with the student instead of a big classroom. So I got mad at my board and said, I sent you a 90-page capital needs report and you need to respond by Friday. Because there's a lot of things that need to be done. So, but we're very excited.
Great. Yeah, and you know, I think that space is both a risk and an opportunity often, and especially when we talk about trainings. One thing that we always hope to do is, build in rent, if someone's doing something at your place, build in rent for yourself, because we know that if, for instance, we're doing a training at the community center, we budget a little bit to rent that space. And so if we're talking about replicating trainings and you've got space to do those trainings in, throw it on the bill, because that's something that we need space. And I think that's really clear, is that places for people to convene, to learn comfortably, is at a
That's actually,
premium.
that was one of the reasons I had Megan over here go over and meet to see the space. I mean, it was the old 1950s department store, like it was called Feinberg's, and used to have a counter in it, and so it's gonna work. I'm just a little nervous. I mean, it's not my home, but I'm still nervous. Azra, maybe Matt will take you by tomorrow.
Great.
So it's exciting, but I have to say I'm an optimistic person and we can do anything type, but it's a big space.
Yeah. I hear that. Well, we'll do everything we can to fill it, right? That's
Yes.
that's the goal.
Exactly.
Anything else? Yeah, Ray.
I'm working with the very beginning pre-literate guys. And anyway, their big concern is getting a driving license and a car, and also maintaining safe driving with the car, and insurance problems and so forth. Is there anybody who serves as an advisor to them on using transportation?
So,
Yeah, go ahead. That's right.
sorry, quick, just great timing on that. There is a session actually on Friday that's twofold. One, it's a training for us to get that information. So I think it's open to CDC to having it with the Department of Labor is doing it. And then Dean, who's here at the center a couple times a week from the Department of Labor, is actually also handling a lot of the insurance pieces. But to my understanding, there is a specific training that is also not training, workshop that's going to be offered. I want to say I heard January 12th, but I'm not sure. I need to double check on that. But I do know there is a training happening this Friday from the Department of Labor that covers a lot of the transportation concerns regarding insurance, getting your license, getting your insurance, the safety around it. And I'm attending it, and some of the other instructors are as well as here at the MCC.
Yep. And so, in the past, so the folks who have gotten their driver's licenses already are the most, those with the best English, because they haven't needed the kind of additional support that others did. And the availability of driver's education classes in Southern Vermont is limited because of beef between Agency of Transportation and Department of Labor. Things above all of our pay grades and scale have created structural boundaries to accessing driver's education, to the extent that the BDCC has even looked at hiring the driver's ed person in Rutland to come down and do classes. So there are a few different things. One is paying for driver's ed and car insurance. Department of Labor can do that. The question of where do we get the trainers and who's paying for, how do we get people to driver's education, and how do they, you can download the DMV handbook, but that does not make a good or safe driver, right? So I think that's where we are now in the next steps. And ideally we'll have a driver's ed trainer who wants to make money and is eager to support this community in getting their driver's licenses. And so that's something that we've been looking for a partner for longer term. But yeah, I mean, it's language is a big barrier, and I can envision standing up an ELL class around the driver's education once we know the actually good path forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Can I respond?
Yeah.
So basically what I'm hearing is there is a workshop coming up and from the Department of Labor. Yeah. Now is there going to be a translator to begin with? And secondly, is it simply voluntary? And so I'm still left with the feeling that there really is, there's something missing here. One of my guys last night has to go up to Faith Ford and pay $400 because he had a rental car and it got a broken window in the process, and he didn't read the fine print and so forth. So, I mean, I'm not capable of being an advisor to them on how to drive safely, and getting the license is actually not that difficult from what I've seen. Some of my guys who speak very little English have licenses and cars. It's just that once they get the car, I'm worried. And I see a hole there.
Yeah. That could be something we talk about, adding to cultural orientation components that exist. And, that's outside of, the BDCC's purview. Again, we're like, the nuts and bolts of all that. But I think that's a great thing to bring up, to talk about, safe, especially in the winter time. Safe driving in the winter, I'm sure, is important. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
And now, one other thing, one of the guys that I'm working with this morning says that his transportation to and from against the grain has coming to an end. Is that true?
Yep. Yeah. So what's, our funding from the Department of Labor, which we were using to pay for the van service, has run out. And so the last few weeks we've been supporting folks in finding their own transportation. And what that often looks like is carpooling. That's what Vermonters of all different backgrounds do when they don't have their own transportation. And so every place that is no longer served by the van has at least enough drivers from within their own community to carpool. It's up to them to organize that, but yeah, so the van service that the BDCC was operating is ending.
Well, I guess what I'm hearing is for the next 2 months, they're on their own. The next, or 2 weeks, I guess it is. Is that right?
Well, it's not, so that transportation, I believe, has ended. And until ECDC or the mover, which I know the mover is exploring micro transit options, the long-term solution for these individuals are the long-term solutions available to all Vermonters. And that is buy a car, carpool with someone who has a car, and work with your fellow employees to do that. Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's an unfortunate reality, but I think it's also an opportunity, again, to it's like another VRAP situation, is that no one understood that this was a unique circumstance for us to operate a transportation company. The worst case scenario from our organization's perspective was hiring drivers, to be, the liability alone was something we didn't love doing. Anyways, we've encouraged ECDC to leverage the same program that we were doing, which, the state splits the cost of that. And we're working with the public transportation system to meet those needs of folks after hours and before hours. When that micro transit solution comes online, we don't know. But again, like it's at each place of employment at Against the Grain, the people who don't have transportation just need to ask their fellow employees to drive them and kick them some money for gas. It's like, you make it work.
I have a quick question then. So what time is the Friday? Was it a presentation from Department of Labor by Dean?
I can double check with some at the MCC. I'll double check with Jill before they go into their what that is exactly. And I do also know that the ECDC was working with the drivers out of Rutland of hosting a number of different workshops. So I know that is also in the works of getting that set up, and that would have to work around a lot of those safety concerns regarding driving. And on top of that, we, you know, Gerald, you and I talked about this, you know, creating those monthly themed like workshops and things. So that additional will also have, but currently ECDC is working with someone outside of Rutland or from Rutland to create some of those additional workshops.
Okay, so I'll find out from Dean also. I can, because actually he came by Val yesterday. Jackie and I met with him. And again, he's another resource that I wasn't quite aware of that could also support our students. And one of the things that he did mention was about driving and so forth. And as Ray was saying, there really needs to be someone advising them on how to buy a car, because these folks I have dealt with who have almost zero English and are buying $25,000 cars at 25% interest because they have no credit. And their monthly payments between insurance and car payment are coming out to about $800. And they don't know how to read the fine print, what Ray was just talking about when he dropped his car off to get it fixed. And Faith Ford has gotten a lot of business from the Afghans. And I had to go up there and argue with sales reps on things because they're loading up these extra, you can buy into this extended management program and all this kind, and they're spending thousands of dollars they don't have and they don't understand, and they sign off on them and they get somebody else to come up and help with an interpretation, but that person doesn't really understand the fine print. So I'm going to talk to Dean and see if he can really be someone or with that counseling piece, because you know, and someone bought a car for $22,000, and in 7 years when it's paid off, he'll have paid $44,000 in 7 years. And they don't have this and they don't understand all that. So, and I spend a lot of time, I have to say, I spend a lot of time working with this because they can't get through the case managers. And it's just, this whole piece really needs support. Great, thank you.
Tim, go for it. Unless if you have a response to that.
Not indirectly, sort of related, and that is just that understanding the nature of the agendas for this particular group, I wonder, there seems to be, at least emerging in this discussion, an overlap with those sort of broader providers meeting, and I wonder whether or not, like, how do these issues, because it seems to me the missing link or the missing voice here is ECDC. And so I don't know whether or not, like, it makes sense to, I don't know if anyone from ECDC was invited for this. I forgot to look at the list, but I'm happy for them to join this group, but at the same time, I also don't want it. I think the purpose of this convening is to talk about these more systemic issues without getting into sort of individual case management issues. So I think if we can integrate ECDC for the purpose of understanding, like, we need an ELL related workshop, workshop related to this case management issue, which we are seeing systemically. Yeah.
And so I think, and I think it's not surprising to me that as the group of folks who has probably the most exposure with this population, even more so than their own case managers, you're seeing the gaps in cultural orientation and cultural misunderstanding around specific resources and opportunities that are not your jobs, but are really important to surface. And I think that's a bigger question is, how do we make this not your jobs? And it can be something that we can do. And so now I've got my, so one is really around transportation and driving. And the other one's really around financial literacy, as it relates to the above. and so I think that's really where, I don't want it to be an entire separate group, like a team meeting, like a cultural orientation working
Right,
group.
right.
But I think that maybe that's something that I'll reach out to ECDC on, or I don't know if cultural orientation is part of the New Vermonter education program. I think who wants to own this, because I think we can fold this information into something that already exists. The question is it part of the case management delivery of services through ECDC? Or is it the New Vermonter education program or something different?
So we had we had this come up over here, and it actually never happened because people didn't show. But we had the same alarming response that Gerald did, in that people went out and bought cars, and we didn't actually even know, except when they had managed to tell the Department of Labor person or somebody. So Melanie, from our side of the Department of Labor, we put together a financial literacy about what a loan would cost, and what we had hoped to do was do it with the class, and it's mostly women, and that they might go home and mention it to their spouses, and then we would have an evening one to make it more accessible, because it, all of those cultural pieces of them wanting to, like any of us, they want to be able to provide for their family, get their kids somewhere. And, so it's kind of how do you do it without, it's just, I find it tricky, but I think that we thought we could do it through the ELL classes. But we haven't, I have to confess, we haven't planned, but we haven't been able to get the people to the class.
Yeah, and I mean, there are plenty of people who have lived in the United States their entire lives who also don't have the financial literacy support to not get really bum car loans. And so I think that, and the question is, are folks who are either learning the hard way or have heard the stories, that you pass down, through a community about, I think there will definitely be people who don't take financial literacy or other things seriously up front, and then they will, because then they'll have a car payment that they're stuck in that they need help with. And I think that it's, I think what I would say is, how we get people to show up to these supports once they're in place. It's going to have to be a little bit of like fear, and the stories of how things went wrong are often motivating factors in doing that, unfortunately. But it's going to happen. I mean, again, it's like, but avoiding it to the extent it is. Yeah, Azra and or Leslie, whichever one.
Thanks, Alex. So just to touch base on something that was that cultural orientation, there's multiple levels to it. So we have the overarching cultural orientation that touches base on a lot of this, which we do offer. So the NVAP program is offering and has offered, and we've had, and there's of course the continuing issue that we have is getting people to attend. We keep on the same day to make sure that it's the best time for everybody. We still run, of course, into issues of them attending. And then this is part of what happens in the class, but I do, and to speak to financial literacy, we've partnered with another local organization that they're going to also be offering specific literacy, financial information workshops. So there are pieces that are happening or being developed and will start that formal workshop will start in February. There will be additional ones in January as well. But I think there's a couple, if you have a handful of individuals who do attend and are present when some of that information has been conveyed, it may or may not be reaching the entire community. And of course, it goes in stages, right? You have the orientation around it, then you have the immersion, and then really the implement, like them truly getting it, and when it's an active part of their lives. So it certainly has been unfortunate that some of them have received such high interest rates. And I think to your point, Alex, if we can use, for lack of a better term, those horror stories as a way to kind of shake the community a little bit to truly become a little bit more aware that information that we are presenting is meant to be useful in these components. So just, working on continuing to bridge that.
Yeah, I mean, like, imagine me talking with Amir, like, and having to communicate that, like, generally, I don't, you don't stereotype about industries and careers, but all car salespeople are unscrupulous, and I hate to be like that, but it is more true than it isn't. And I explained to him about lemon laws, things about like, what you're like, things that if you didn't know, like the assumption that someone cannot sell you a broken car for more than it's worth is something that if, there are plenty of other, especially financial transactions in which folks aren't as vulnerable. But I do think, it's important to make sure that we have that intervention. And it's, again, it's cultural as much as it's financial literacy to understand, when you go into the hospitals will charge you too much money, but at least they're going to be like somewhat honest about it, right? It's like, but it's, those nuances of how to navigate your expenses take a little bit of, extra help. Leslie, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's true, but I also feel that as a community, we should be exerting pressure on places like car to say, no, this is not okay. You're taking advantage of a group of people that are coming here that don't have the financial literacy, and we take objection to that. I feel like that's where it shouldn't all be on the shoulders of our new neighbors. I think this is, for me, part of the whole being a welcoming community, is holding the community accountable for not taking advantage of people. I think there's a range. Yes, all car sales people are going to try and get the best deal they can within reason, but it sounds to me, I'm wondering if they're outside of the bounds of within reason by taking advantage of people that just don't have the language skills.
No, I think that, and I think, for better or for worse, what we're seeing in this population generally is folks transitioning from into middle class Vermont hoodism, right? Like, they're entering the middle class from Vermont standards because they're trying to, because they're earning decent wages and a lot of their other expenses are offset, and now they're facing the same structural barriers that we know other working class and middle class Vermonters are facing around access to transportation. That is not new. Is you get a high interest loan to buy a used car that needs work, and then it falls apart the next year, and then you sell it, and like it is all part of the cycle of poverty that we know is holding working class folks down. And so I think that's where there will be structural solutions and just education and cultural orientation about, here's like, why it's important to understand why leasing a sports car is a bad idea, no matter how much money you make, like kind of thing. But I'll follow up maybe with folks at World Learning and ECDC. Sean Marie, thank you so much for coming. I'll follow up with you also around the childhood stuff.
Okay, thank you.
The cultural orientation problems or the obstacles, like these things are great to hear about. I want to keep this space as a place to share that. And you are ELL experts, professionals, and that's what I want you focusing your day-to-day time on, because we have other people to do the other stuff. Actually, we don't have as many ELL professionals to do what we want to do. So I think that's really what I'll try and find a way to offload some of these concerns, knowing you'll all still be involved and you'll still care. But again, I think, as things ramp up, hopefully around career education, we need other people solving transportation, which, again, a lot of folks have spent a lot of time thinking about, and we'll keep working on that. Great. We're 4 minutes over time. Any other questions, comments?
I can report a success, if that's helpful, to end on a positive note, that in the citizenship online class that I've been teaching this wave, as we call them, instead of terms or semesters here at Val, 2 of the students have appointments this month up in Colchester to take the actual citizenship interview, and fully expect that both of them will do well and then get the appointment to come and take the oath of citizenship. So I realize that's far out on the horizon for many of the very recent arrivals, but one of my students is an Afghan. Excuse me, he's been here for longer than most. So it's very exciting to see. And I'm so appreciative of hearing about the financial literacy pieces, because I also have a student who's interested in that, not coming at it from buying a car perspective, but still we have Val offers an online class. She would prefer a face-to-face one, I think. So it's great for me to hear these other things that are coming up. And I'm offering, just to put in a plug, a conversation class for media and advanced level starting in January on Monday nights, in addition to the citizenship class on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Send me, I saw that in the schedule. I didn't include it because I didn't know enough about it. If you want to send me a little bit of information on like how to get involved in that, I'll slap it on the calendar.
Will do. Thank you.
Great. I hope everyone has a nice break, however long or short you get. I hope you enjoy it. We're, I think, hopefully going to reconvene in January around, you know, a lot of what we started talking about. But feel free to reach out in the meantime. Any other questions or ideas?
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Alex. Good to see you all.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Everyone, take care.
Okay, thank you, everyone. See you soon.